8th of January, 1969, we talked to Miloš on the phone. I did talk to Miloš on the phone, Miloš Forman, I mean, and told him that somebody called who was involved in underground activities against Russians who occupy Czechoslovakia already for 6 months. That Russian tanks are leaving military barracks around Prague, and they are coming to Prague. And it was already dark, and Miloš said, "Okay, I think we have to go, and pick me up in 1 hour, and we'll go." So I did, and Miloš chose small border crossings to Austria. From Czechoslovakia to Austria, we got there around 4 o'clock in the morning. And there were patches of snow, nobody at the crossings. And the officer came out with Kalashnikov over his shoulder, and he said, "Comrades, where are you going?" And I said, because he was coming from this side, "We are going for a weekend to Vienna." And he said, "Can I see your passports?" I gave him our passports. He looked through it, and he said, "I don't see any exit visa you have," which was a yellow piece of paper, which of course we didn't have, which they didn't give to anybody. And I said, "They are not there, so they must be in a luggage back in a car." I got out of the car, and I was pretending in a bag, going through the luggage. I'm looking for this exit visa, and I hear this conversation. "Are you Miloš Forman, the film director?" And Miloš, who has a very deep voice, he said, "Yes." He said, "I have seen all your movies." And Miloš said, and I thought I'm going to drop dead when I heard it, he said, "And I bet you didn't like any of them." Can you imagine in that situation? And the guy said, "Are you kidding? Do you remember that ring from Loves of a Blonde, how it rolls on the floor under the tables?" And began to describe scenes from Miloš's movies. And then he leaned and he said, "Don't look for those exit visa." And he let us go. And he used an expression in Czech you use when you will never see the people again. He said, "Be with God," in Czech. And he let us go. So we got very lucky. Éclairage team had a very interesting life. I believe that films have lives like people. Some films are stillborn. Some films have short lives over the weekend or a few weeks. And some films live long time. When I made this movie, first when I showed the screenplay to the film studio, they said, "This is not a screenplay. There is no story. It has no conflict. What is it about?" And but they said, "But you were involved with Miloš Forman on his movies, so we let you do." And there was like a ritual that when we finished the movie, there was a screening room like this in a film studio, and the director of the studio was always sitting in the second row, and we had to, the authors of the movie, sit behind him like 3 rows, including 2 censors, 2 people who were from the party, and they had to approve the film. And during my film, which was supposed to be a comedy, nobody laughed when they watched it. And when it finished, the director turned backward to me, like that, and he said, "This is probably the most boring film I have ever seen in my life." So that was my first review I got.
Voilà la première critique que j'ai reçue.
And then there was a screening and a filmmakers sort of gathering, and it took off from there. And it was written in Life magazine, and it went all over the world to different festivals. And there was a veterinarian doctor in Czech lands who told me that he saw the film 60 times.
Et j'ai rencontré un vétérinaire tchèque qui m'a dit qu'il avait vu le film 60 fois.
And in New York, they were showing it every year in Little Carnegie.
Et à New York, on le projetait chaque année dans le Little Carnegie.
And there was like a panel, they would discuss it with the audience.
Et il y avait tout un groupe de discussion avec le public.
And when I was in New York, I would come and just listen what they had to say. And one time, there was a very prominent critic who said that he had a friend, a professor at university in Boston, who had a tendency to be depressed, and each time he thought about suicide, he would watch Intimate Writing. And so, and it's being shown once in a while, and actors come to me and they say, you know, those actors are so good, we are going to go to study acting in Prague. And I have to say, I'm sorry, nobody's an actor, because I found all these people on the street. I don't know how it happened. A United Artists wanted to meet me in Paris. And strangely enough, I still remember the name of the director of United Artists was Benzaken. And he offered me a film. He gave me the script and he said, take a look at it if you would like to make it. And I read it, and like 3 days later we met. I said, yeah, I can make this movie. And he said, oh, we are so happy because the guy who wrote the script, he wants to direct it. We don't want him to direct it because he never made a movie. Oh, I said, the writer wants to direct it, so I'm not directing it. And I walked out of the office, and Miloš said, you are so stupid, we have no money, somebody offers you a job and you turn it down, so come with me to America. Because he had an invitation to Paramount to discuss possible project. Because two of his films, Loves of Blonde and Fireman's Ball, were nominated for Academy Awards for the Best Foreign Picture. So Life magazine wrote a long article about Miloš. So he went there, and so I had nothing to do. So I went with him. And we got very lucky because there was a Czech actor who lived in America since before the Second World War. And he knew an art director who was getting a divorce, and he had a little house in West Village in New York. And for legal reasons, neither he or his wife were allowed to live there, so he gave it to us to babysit the house, which had a little garden. And coming from Europe, we didn't think it was anything exceptional. Now I know that we are incredibly lucky to have a house in West Village. Anyway, I didn't expect to make movies in America because I didn't speak English, really very little. And I didn't think that America needs a Czech director who doesn't speak English too much. So I remember I was looking for different jobs. I went to the docks in New York. I remember they offered me some job for $7 an hour, which was a lot of money that time. And then I was ready to drive a taxi or whatever eventually. And one day, not too long after we landed in New York, a friend of ours who used to be a director of a small theater in Prague, which was called Semaphore, and we made a movie with Miloš about that little theater, which was in film called An Audition, which was 2 short stories in one film. So the director of that theater's wife had a birthday, and he invited us for like a surprise birthday party. And we went there. I don't remember Miloš being there, but and there were about 30 people having a good time, and one man standing near the wall, leaning against the wall, who looked kind of dejected. He was the only American at that apartment, and nobody talked to him. And he had a Czech girlfriend, and that's why he was at that party, because she wanted to join that party. So I thought that I should spend an evening with him improving my English. And I did, and he was extremely grateful. And he turned out to be a playwright whose name was David Milton, and he invited me to his play, which had a opening next week in off Broadway, small little theater. I went there. There were about 5 people in the audience. 3 of them left during the intermission. And after the play, we went to have a drink. I still remember the place. It was a very unpretentious little tavern with sawdust on the floor, where journalists and writers from West Village used to go and have a drink. And we went there, and he said to me, you know, I'm doing this for 15 years, and I cannot make a living, and I don't know what to do. And I said, look, did you ever write a screenplay? And he said, no, I wouldn't know how. I said, well, I wrote a few screenplays, so if you want, we can write a screenplay together. And he said, what would we write about? I said, about those characters in your play. And he said, okay. And in 3 months, we had a script. And he knew somebody, being a playwright, he knew somebody in a theater who knew somebody at United Artists. He gave him that script, and then United Artists looked at it, and they said, we have a deal with George Segal. We are supposed to give him 3 projects a year, and we don't have enough, and this we can give them this. If he likes it, we'll make it. They gave it to him. He said yes. I said, but I don't want George Segal. And they couldn't believe it. I wanted some other actor. But the writer begged me on his knees. And so I relented. And then I thought, well, it's easy to make movies in America. today I know better, but before I knew, we were making a film with George Segal, Karen Black, and I found Bobby De Niro on a stage in a small theater. I believe I gave him the first professional job, and I found Burt Young, who was a mafia runner, who studied at Actors Studio for about a year, came to an open call. I did for, I believe that some people out of 15,000 unemployed actors in New York deserve an audition if they want to have some. So I said, let's do an open call, what they call that. 800 people showed up. And one of them was Burt Young, and he was the one I picked from those 800 people. I gave him, we wrote with David a small scene for him, because he was very powerful.
Ce qui est important, c'est que ce film, à l'époque où il est sorti, c'est-à-dire il y a maintenant 50 ans presque, ce film a été un des déclencheurs de ce qu'on appelait la nouvelle vague tchèque.
And he called me one day and he said, I have this treatment, nobody wants to do it. Would you be kind enough and read it? And I said, okay. He said, I just got married and I need to buy some furniture. I want the studio to give me some money. So I said, okay, tell the studio that I will do the film. And he said to me, no, you don't want to read what I wrote? I said, listen, do you need the money for the furniture? So, about 6 weeks later, the studio called and they said to me, let's meet about intimate lighting. I said, what is that? They said, well, you said you will direct it, so let's have a meeting about it. So I called the author, who you will see his name on the screen. His name was Václav Šašek. And I said, please send me the treatment, because we have to have a meeting a few days from now about it. So he sent me the treatment, I read it, and I realized why nobody wanted to do it.
Et donc il m'a envoyé le traitement, j'ai lu le scénario et j'ai compris pourquoi aucun réalisateur ne voulait faire ce film.
It was a story of a couple on their vacation going on the canoe down the river across Czech land. So there was a little scene where they see somebody fishing and they stop, and the main character, recognizes his schoolmate from a conservatory, musical conservatory. So we got together, Václav Šašek, myself, and Papoušek, and Papoušek worked with me and Miloš on Miloš's films. And I proposed that from that little scene we'll write the whole script. He wrote the script and presented it to the studio. The studio said, this is not a film script. What is it about? There is no story, there is no conflict, it's full of banalities. But you were working with Miloš Forman on 4 movies, so we let you do it. So I made a film, and there was a ritual that we always had to present it to a director of the film studio with 2 censors, and usually there were 2 other people there. And he had to be the first person who saw the finished film. Showing him the film, Václav Šašek was there, Jaroslav Papoušek, myself, and the cinematographer, Mirek Ondříček, whose work you know because he shot Amadeus for Miloš Forman. And I thought I made a comedy, but nobody laughed when we showed it.
Et moi je pensais avoir tourné une comédie, mais personne ne riait dans la salle.
And when it was over, the director turned around, looked at me, and he said, "This is the most boring film I have ever seen in my life."
Et la séance terminée, le directeur se tourne vers moi et me dit, ça c'était le film le plus ennuyeux que j'ai vu de ma vie.
So I just hope you don't feel the same.
Donc j'espère que vous n'allez pas trouver la même chose, être du même avis.
Donc éclairage intime, il va y avoir aussi la projection d'un court-métrage qui s'appelle Un fade après-midi.
We decided that we will take short stories of Mr. Rabal and make a movie to help him to be accepted officially. And it worked. It legitimized him as a writer. And from then on, he didn't have any problem publishing his works. And Jiří Mencel made a film based on his novel called Closely Watched Trains, and he got an Oscar for it in America. He used to come to Hotel Chelsea, where I lived. I was on the 5th floor, and Miloš was on the 7th floor. And he would ring 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm in bed, pick up the phone, he said, I'm coming up. And he would come up with 2 paper bags full of bread and salami and white wine, and he would put it on a table and cross his arms like this. He said, so tell me, who is giving you any trouble? I said, Bert, I will not tell you. I don't want them to end up in a hospital. He said, oh, we don't do that anymore. I said, what do you do? He said, oh, we just talk to them. And then he would tell everybody who he met, who knew me, he said, oh, take care of him. And he was a talented writer also. We made the movie. I remember being totally exhausted because I was shooting in English during the day and reshooting it at night in Czech, everything. So I was working 24 hours a day.
And why were you reshooting it in Czech?
In my dreams.
Ah, okay.
And there it was. We finished the movie, and then the film got New York Critics Film Award for the best movie of the year. And so suddenly, you know, people were calling me and they wanted me to make all sorts of movies, which, you know, I said no to quite a few because I never wanted to make violent movies. I never go to see violent movies, exceptionally when it's some really known director doing something I go to, but I never really liked any. So I said, okay, I don't know to see it, why should I make it? So I took myself out of 80% of American production, and which the agents couldn't understand. And but from then on, I was kind of lucky that I always had a choice to make a movie here and there and pay my bills. One day, producers from Los Angeles, whose name was Alex Vinitsky and Eileen Sellers, and they used to be real estate people, and they got into a movie production. They made few movies before, and they invited me to go to Los Angeles to they offered me to make a movie, a sequel to Cross of Iron, which was a story about German military officers. I didn't like the script. And they claimed that they have Richard Burton committed. I didn't like Richard Burton. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I don't want to do it. And they said, look, you can meet the writer tomorrow and you can discuss the script and you can make changes. I said, no, I don't think this will work. They said, look, we get you a blind date if you stay. I didn't know what it is. I didn't know what it meant. I said, what is that? He said, well, you'll see. They picked up the phone and there was this female voice on the other side, and they gave it to me, and I talked to her. I said, Peter Bogdanovich, the director, invited me for his birthday party. So I asked her if she would want to come with me, and she said yes. Very pleasant voice. And so I said to them, okay, I'll stay till tomorrow. And like an hour later, I came down the lobby of the Beverly Hills Hotel, and there was this beautiful black girl waiting for me. And I took her to Peter Bogdanovich's birthday party, and I never left Los Angeles. And very soon after that, I didn't want to make the movie. But a few weeks later, a gentleman whose name was Paul Gurian, who looked like a overage hippie, was 6'4", and hair down to his tush and mustache like that, called me up and he said, I have seen Intimate Lighting and I have a project which I think you would be very good for. I said, okay, what is it? And so we met and he told me that it's called Cutter and Bone, and it's based on a book which Richard Dreyfuss wanted to do. And that's why United Artists were interested in making that movie. But twice Richard Dreyfuss changed his mind, so the two directors who were going to make the movie, one of which was Robert Mulligan, and the other one I forgot, stepped out of the project because many American directors would not make a film unless there is a big star part of that project. And he said Richard Dreyfuss is giving us some signs that he is interested again in making it. So I read the script and I said, yeah, if we can work on the script a little bit. I know these characters, but I think Richard Dreyfuss is wrong for that film. So they were surprised, and they said, but United Artists said, but that's why we're making it. I said, well, I'm sorry, but he's a very good actor, but for a different type of a story. And so they stopped the movie. The producer was not very happy about it because he already spent 2.5 years putting it together. So a few weeks later, United Artists asked me, would you go to New York and meet Richard Dreyfuss? He's playing Iago in Shakespeare in the Park program, which is being staged every summer in Central Park. And I said, sure, I like New York, I go, why not? And I never forget that night. There was like few hundred people there, smoking marijuana, playing harmonicas, hugging, necking, singing, and there were these poor actors in the middle of it, trying to overshout all that noise. And I remember Richard Dreyfuss waving his arms and looking a little hysterical. And then this guy came out who had a very low voice and didn't try to shout over everybody, and people stopped doing whatever they were doing and they started to listen to him. And I said, "Who's that?" And the guy who took me there, he said, "That's John Hurt." I said, "Can I meet him after the show?" So I spent 15 minutes with Richard Dreyfuss and 3 days with John Hurt. And I came back and I said, "I want John Hurt to play Cutter." They said, "You're crazy." I mean, he was in a movie called Head Over Heels, which didn't make any money. I said, "Look, you know better than that. It's not his fault. He's perfect for this part." So they, again, didn't want to continue. And a few weeks later, they called us in the office and they said, "Listen, we are making the biggest hit of all times, Heaven's Gate. And if we would love to have a follow-up movie with one of the stars of Heaven's Gate. So if you take Jeff Bridges for the other part, we'll make the movie with John Hurt." I said, "Yeah, I will take him. He's perfect." So, and they said, "But we are not going to help you. You have to get him on your own." So we sent him the screenplay. And I remember he invited us to his Malibu ranch house. It was very sort of bucolic looking, kind of falling apart, all wood. And we rang the gate. It was a wooden gate, and it made this kind of a sound like from Hitchcock's movie, you know, the and it opened up, and there was Jeff Bridges in dungarees, bare-breasted, barefooted, and I knew he wanted to do the movie because he was dressed like the character from Cutter's Way. But I didn't have time to tell the producer it was his first movie, and he was shaking because this was an hour of truth for him. And there were 2 German shepherds standing behind Jeff. And, you know, you come out of the car and you say hello, and he says hello, and now is that awkward pause. What do you say next? So Paul went past Jeff Bridges to the other dog who clearly didn't like us. He was like a beige color that was showing his teeth. And Paul, with his 6'4", leaned forward and he said, "Oh, you are a nice doggy. What is your name, nice doggy?" And the nice doggy jumped and took off his cheek. It was like, oh, and you could see his teeth here, blood. And so the first thing Jeff said after hello was, "Oh my God." And he ran to his house, brought 2 towels, he put it on his face, and drove down to Malibu to a doctor. And who I remember was working on his house. He looked like a bricklayer. So he washed his hands and took him to his office, and we were sitting in a waiting room, and Jeff was saying, "You know, I should have locked that dog in. He had done it before. My wife is going to kill me when she hears that." And the nurses were coming in and out. They would say, "How is it going? What is it?" "It's fine, don't worry, he's going to be okay." We never discussed the movie. And somebody asked him later, "What would you do if you didn't like the script?" He said, "I would have made the movie." So that's how the German Shepherd green-lighted Cutter's Way, you know, because Jeff said yes. He might have made it even without that, but I'm not quite sure. Since I was very young, like 12, saw myself more often being a writer than anything else. And my father had a big library, and he was a farmer, he had a farm. But he was very young, he was not too often at home, and I read a lot. So for me it was a kind of natural to start writing scripts, and I think having to do an audition for a film school, part of it was to write some kind of a screenplay of like a short film. And so, and at school, the director's classes, you know, I learned as much as I could about screenwriting. And when one day I would see Miloš here and there, because we met in a boarding school when I was 12 and he was 13. So we would see each other occasionally, and one day we began to talk about what would be the way to make some decent movies in Czechoslovakia, because he was an assistant director on one movie and I was an assistant director on another movie. We didn't like either of these movies, and we didn't like Czech movies. I mean, it was, you know, it was the Ždanovian aesthetics which were imposed on everybody. And I remember that Miloš took out a piece of paper and we came up with like 8 points, that it has to be shot outside of the studio, natural light, non-professional actors, and that it should be more or less a comedy, because the Communist Party was less tough, the censors were less tough with because these comedic stories, because they had a slogan that the people should be entertained, and maybe there were a few more points, but so I don't remember now all of them, but Miloš bought 16mm camera, East German, 16mm camera. We got some film from a television studio. We would buy some bottles of wine and they would give us the leftovers of the films, and we began to make that documentary about this little theater in Prague. And then Miloš liked a novel by Jaroslav Papoušek, which was called Black Peter. And we started to write a screenplay based on that book with Jaroslav Papoušek, who was a sculptor, really, and made Black Peter, and then Love's a Blonde and Fireman's Ball, and I liked being a screenwriter. Not too much responsibilities. Before that, before the film school, I had all sorts of jobs. I was in a steel factory, I was a bricklayer, I worked on the railroad, and So it was, from 6 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Being a screenwriter was pretty comfortable, and I enjoyed doing it. So I didn't really think of being a director that much. I didn't have that ambition, really. And one day, a guy whose name was Václav Šašek, who worked in a production department, the Studio Barrandov, who was the person who, when we finished the script, we would give him the script. His job was he was like filtering those scripts. He would say, okay, this film, my bosses should read or not. And he always was pushing our scripts. He liked them. And he called me up. So I had a soft spot for him. He called me up and he said, I wrote a treatment and I offered it to several directors and they don't want to do it. Would you like to look at it? I just got married and I need some money to buy furniture. And I said, okay, so tell them I'll do it. He said, don't you want to read the script? I said, well, do you need the furniture or not? So if you do, tell them I'll do it and they'll pay you for it. So he laughed and he said, okay. And he did that and I forgot about it. And like 6 weeks later, I get a call from film studio, a production group, and they said, let's meet about intimate lighting. And I said, what's that? They said, well, you said you are going to direct it. It's what Václav Šašek wrote, this treatment. I said, okay. So I called Šašek and I said, please give me that treatment to read, and because we are having a meeting about it. So he gave me the treatment, I read it, and I realized why nobody wanted to do it. Because it was a trip on a canoe of a couple, young couple, down the river, and nothing much was happening there. And but there was a paragraph where they see somebody fishing, and the guy recognizes his schoolmate from a conservatory, because the guy in the canoe was a violoncellist, professional violoncellist, and he recognizes this man from the conservatory who was a director of a local small musical school. And then they in that treatment, they have a little talk, and then they continue down the river. I said, let's make a movie out of this paragraph. And that's what we did. Papoušek and Vašek Šašek and myself, we wrote the script, and the studio said, listen, this is not a movie script. Because there is nothing happening, there is no conflict. What is the story? There is no story. But you were involved in Miloš's films, Loves of a Blonde, Black Peter, and so we'll let you do it. It's cheap. And so, okay, so I said, I had a dilemma of sorts to cast the film with actors who cannot play the instruments because it was about musicians, or to cast non-actors who are musicians. And so I chose that way to go, and I got lucky. I found some wonderful people. And when I finished the film, we had to show it to the director of the studio, whose name was Josef Harnach. And he was always the first man who saw the finished movie. And the movie, I thought, is a kind of a comedy, but he was there with two censors and I think two other people from the studio, and nobody laughed throughout the screening. So I thought I might be in trouble. And then he turned around and gave me a very long look. And he said, "This is probably the most boring film I have ever seen." So that was the first critic I got for this movie. And then the movie took off. Each time it was shown, and word of mouth was very positive, and it was the director apologized to me several times, I must say, and the movie is playing till today.
Thank you very much.